Why life falls apart without God at the center. Imagine with me for a moment. You've built a life that looks impressive from the outside. Maybe you've worked hard for your career, your education, your relationships. You've put the hours in, you've sacrificed, and people around you might even say you're successful. Yet one day, almost without warning, everything feels like it collapses. A sudden financial hit, a relationship that ends, a diagnosis you didn't expect, a loneliness that creeps in when you lay your head on the pillow at night. And you sit there thinking, how did I end up here? Why does it feel like everything is crumbling beneath me? It's in moments like that when we begin to realize the truth. Life built without God at the center will eventually fall apart. It doesn't matter how strong you think you are or how carefully you've planned every detail. Without God, the foundation simply cannot hold. It might last for a little while. It might even look beautiful for a season, but when the storms come, and they will come, whatever is not built on Him will eventually collapse. That collapse may not always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it's quiet. It's the soul that feels hollow, the heart that feels restless, the mind that feels anxious. Outwardly, things might still look okay, but inwardly, it's all falling apart. And deep down, we all know this truth. Success, love, fame, wealth, and pleasure are not enough to sustain us. We were designed to live in relationship with the one who created us. Anything less is incomplete. The tragedy is that most of us don't even realize we're building without God until the collapse happens. We think we're in control, that we've got it all figured out, that as long as we keep working hard and striving, we'll be safe. But life has a way of pulling the rug out from under us. And when that happens, the question isn't, how strong was my plan? The question is, what was my foundation? If God is not at the center will not hold. And maybe right now you're listening and you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've felt the emptiness. You've experienced the cracks in the walls. You've sensed that something is missing, even if you can't quite put it into words. That's not coincidence. That's God reminding you that you were never meant to live without Him. We live in a world that constantly tells us we're the masters of our fate, that if we just believe in ourselves, if we just work harder, if we just push further, we can build a perfect life. But the truth is, no matter how much we try to control, life will always remind us that we are not in control. Unexpected storms come. People disappoint us. Our bodies grow weak. Our hearts ache. And without God, every one of those storms has the power to break us. Jesus gave us a picture of this in Matthew 7 when He spoke about the wise and foolish builders. One built his house on rock, the other built his house on sand. When the storms came, and notice, He didn't say if, but when, the house built on sand fell with a great crash. That's what happens when God isn't the center. The storms reveal what the foundation truly is. Think about your own life for a second. What's at the center? Is it money, career, relationships, ambition, comfort? None of those things are bad in themselves, but if they are the foundation, they will eventually fail you. The market can crash, jobs can disappear, people can walk away, health can fade, but God, He remains the same yesterday, today, and forever. He is the only foundation that cannot be shaken. The illusion of control is one of the greatest lies we live under. We like to believe we can plan our way into security. We set goals, save money, make schedules, and organize everything down to the detail. And there's wisdom in planning. But let's be honest, how many times has life gone exactly according to your plan? More often than not, something happens that you never saw coming. A closed door, a sudden loss, a painful change. Without God at the center, those moments can crush us, because we thought we were the ones holding everything together. We believed we were in control, but the truth is we're not, and life apart from God exposes that reality in the hardest way possible. Have you ever noticed how fragile everything feels when you're trying to hold it all together on your own? One phone call can change everything. One decision can unravel years of work. One storm can wash away what took decades to build. That's why building on sand is so dangerous. It looks steady for a while. It feels secure, but underneath, it's unstable, temporary, and vulnerable. When God is not the center, we become like captains trying to steer a ship without a compass. We may look confident, but we're drifting. And storms don't ask for permission. They come whether we're ready or not. And when they do, what you've built your life on will be tested. If it's not God, the test will break you. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you've tasted what it feels like for life to collapse when you thought you had it all together. Or maybe you're there right now, holding the pieces, wondering how it all slipped through your fingers. If so, let me remind you, this isn't the end. The collapse isn't meant to destroy you. Sometimes God allows the storm to show us the weakness of our foundation, so we'll turn back to Him. Because here's the truth. He's not asking you to hold everything together. He's asking you to let Him be the one who holds you together. When He is the center, storms can still rage, waves can still crash, but your life won't fall apart, because it's not built on sand. It's built on the rock that cannot be moved. We live in a culture that glorifies success. From the time we are young, we're told to dream big, work hard, chase the money, build the brand, and climb the ladder. And for many people, that's exactly what they do. They achieve the goals they set. They buy the house. They get the promotion. They marry the person they dreamed of. They travel the world. And they finally arrive at the place they thought would satisfy them. But then, something unexpected happens. After all the striving, after all the climbing, after reaching the top of the mountain, they look around and realize the mountain is empty. Some of the most successful people in the world have admitted to feeling this emptiness. Celebrities who seem to have it all confess to depression. Billionaires who can buy anything say they still feel unsatisfied. Athletes at the peak of their careers admit they don't know who they are without the sport. It's the same story written in different lives. Success without God still feels empty, because you can achieve every dream and still be missing the one thing your soul was created for, Him. King Solomon, one of the wealthiest and wisest men to ever live, wrote about this in Ecclesiastes. He had everything a human could want: riches, power, wisdom, fame, relationships. Yet he said, meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. That's not the testimony of a man who lacked achievement. It's the cry of a man who discovered that achievement without God is just chasing the wind. It feels like it should fill you, but it never does. Maybe you've felt this too. You got the job you wanted, but it didn't bring the joy you expected. You finally bought the car, but the excitement wore off quickly. You reached a milestone and thought, if I can just get there, I'll be happy, only to realize that the happiness lasted for a moment and then disappeared. That's because success apart from God can never satisfy the soul. We were made to hunger for Him. Nothing else can fill that space. Jesus asked a haunting question. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? It's possible to succeed in the eyes of the world and fail in the eyes of eternity. It's possible to climb so high on the ladder of success only to realize the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. And that's the tragedy of living without God at the center. You can reach the top and still feel like you're at the bottom. The emptiness of success without God is not always obvious to others. Some people are masters at hiding it. They smile on stage, they laugh at parties, they post the perfect pictures online, but when they're alone, they feel a hollow ache inside. That ache is not failure, it's the absence of God, and it will not go away until He becomes the center. But here's the danger. Many people don't even realize they've pushed God out until it's too late. We rarely wake up one day and decide, I'm going to live without God. It doesn't usually happen with a bold declaration. It happens slowly, subtly, quietly. It's the drift. At first, we still go to church, still pray, still open the Bible once in a while. But then life gets busy. Work deadlines pile up. Kids need attention. Opportunities come knocking. We say, "I'll pray later. I'll read later. I'll get back to God when things slow down." But things rarely slow down. And before we know it, God is no longer at the center. He's been pushed to the margins. This drift doesn't feel dangerous at first. In fact, sometimes life even seems to be going well. The career grows, the relationships feel strong, the money comes in. But that's exactly why it's so dangerous. The drift lulls us into a false sense of security. We think, "I'm fine without putting God first." But what we don't realize is that every day we drift further, the foundation grows weaker. It's like a boat tied to the shore. If the rope is loosened just a little, the boat doesn't suddenly drift out to sea. It happens slowly, inch by inch, current by current, until eventually it's miles away from where it started. That's what happens to us when we drift from God. One compromise here, one distraction there, and before long we look up and realize we're lost, far from the shore of His presence. We push God out in subtle ways. We chase after success until it consumes us. We prioritize relationships until we idolize them. We give our energy to entertainment, pleasure, or comfort until there's nothing left for Him. We don't reject Him outright. We just quietly replace Him. And the result is always the same. Eventually, the cracks start to show. Eventually, the storm comes. And when it does, we realize we've built on sand. The drift is dangerous because it blinds us. It convinces us that we're still close to God when in reality, we've been slowly pulling away. It tells us we'll come back later, but later rarely comes. It whispers that we're in control when really we're one storm away from collapse. And maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe you haven't abandoned God completely, but if you're honest, He hasn't been at the center. Maybe work, relationships, dreams, or distractions have taken His place. And you know the truth. You feel the drift in your soul. If so, this is your wake-up call. Because the drift only leads one way, away from God and toward collapse. But here's the good news. God doesn't let us drift without calling us back. He loves us too much to watch us sail into destruction. Sometimes He uses storms to wake us up. Sometimes He lets the emptiness of success remind us that we can't live without Him. Sometimes He whispers in the quiet of our hearts, "Come back. Put me at the center again." When life falls apart, most people look at circumstances and say, "It's just bad luck. It's just the way things go." But there is a deeper reality behind the brokenness we experience. The Bible makes it clear, sin separates us from God. And separation from God is not a small matter. It is the root cause of why life unravels when He is not at the center. Isaiah 59:2 says, "Your iniquities have separated you from your God. Your sins have hidden His face from you, so that He will not hear." That separation is like cutting a branch off a tree. The branch may stay green for a while, but eventually it withers because it has been cut off from its source of life. When we live without God, we are cut off from the true source of peace, purpose, and strength. We may still try to draw life from other things, relationships, success, entertainment, but none of those can keep us alive at the deepest level. They are like trying to water a plant with sand. They look like they should help, but they never satisfy the need. The spiritual reality is that apart from God, we are spiritually dead. And when the spirit is dead, it doesn't matter how alive everything else looks. Eventually, the brokenness seeps into every part of life. This is why so many people struggle with restlessness, confusion, and lack of direction. Without God, we are left wandering. We may try to set our own path, but Proverbs 14:12 warns, "There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death." What looks good to us may in fact be leading us further into destruction. And without God, We don't have the wisdom or discernment to see it until it's too late. The spiritual realm is real, and the enemy works hardest on those who try to live without God's covering. Jesus said the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. When God is not at the center, the door is wide open for the enemy to wreak havoc. He doesn't always come with obvious attacks. Sometimes it's subtle. A whisper of discouragement here, a temptation there, a distraction that pulls us further from prayer, further from Scripture, further from community. Little by little, he weakens us until we collapse. That's why Paul warns us in Ephesians 6 to put on the full armor of God. Without God, we are fighting spiritual battles with no armor, no weapons, no defense. No wonder so many lives fall apart. They are stepping onto a battlefield unarmed, trying to fight forces they cannot see, without the protection of the one who has already won the victory. But with God at the center, everything changes. His Spirit strengthens us. His Word guides us. His presence covers us. Life without Him is like walking blind through a minefield. Life with Him is like walking through the same field with a guide who knows every step. That's the difference between collapse and endurance. And it's not just in the spiritual unseen realm that this plays out. We see it most clearly in relationships, because when God is not at the center of our relationships, whether friendships, marriages, or families, those relationships inevitably begin to crack. Think about what love looks like apart from God. It becomes conditional. It says, I'll love you as long as you meet my needs. I'll stay with you as long as you make me happy. I'll be your friend as long as you don't disappoint me. But God's love is different. His love is unconditional, sacrificial, forgiving. When He is at the center of our relationships, we learn to love not with our own limited ability, but with His unlimited grace. Without that, our relationships end up fueled by selfishness, pride, and unmet expectations. And sooner or later, that leads to division. Marriages that leave God out often start strong with passion, excitement, and dreams. But when the storms of life come, financial stress, health struggles, conflict, they crumble because the foundation was built on emotion, not on Christ. But marriages that keep Him at the center endure. They may face the same storms, but instead of tearing them apart, those storms push them closer to God and to each other. Friendships without God often fracture under pressure. Families fall apart when forgiveness is absent. Communities dissolve when selfishness takes over. But when God is at the center, forgiveness flows more easily, humility replaces pride, and love becomes deeper than human effort. The Bible is full of stories that prove this. When God was the center of Israel's life, they flourished. When they turned to idols, they collapsed into division and exile. When Christ was at the center of the early church, even persecution couldn't break them. But when people began to pursue power and self-interest, corruption crept in. The same is true for us today. Without God in the middle, even the closest relationships eventually crack under pressure. Look at your own life. Have you seen it? A friendship that drifted apart because bitterness was never dealt with. A marriage strained because expectations weren't met. A family divided because forgiveness was withheld. These are not just accidents. They are symptoms of a deeper problem. Relationships without God's presence lack the strength to endure. But when God is placed at the center, even broken relationships can be restored. He heals hearts, softens pride, and teaches us how to love as He loves. He doesn't just patch things together, He rebuilds them stronger than before. That's the beauty of His presence. What the enemy meant to destroy, God can redeem. One of the clearest signs of life without God at the center is the heavy weight of anxiety, fear, and emptiness that so many people carry. We live in a generation more connected than ever before. Yet loneliness is at an all-time high. We have more resources, entertainment, and comfort than any generation before us, yet depression and anxiety continue to rise. Why? Because none of those things can fill the hole inside the human heart, that only God was meant to fill. Jesus said in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Notice he didn't say, "I will give you success, I will give you riches, I will give you fame." He said, "Rest." Because he knew the deepest ache of the human soul is not more achievement or pleasure. It's rest. Rest from striving, rest from fear, rest from the relentless pressure to prove yourself, rest from the emptiness that gnaws at you when everything else is quiet. Without God, that rest never comes. Anxiety becomes the default. You may lie awake at night rehearsing tomorrow's worries. You may carry stress in your body that medicine can't fully cure. You may chase distraction after distraction, hoping something will numb the ache, but it doesn't last. Because the only true cure for the soul's anxiety is the presence of the one who made the soul. People try to fill that emptiness with many things. Some turn to relationships, hoping another person will complete them. Others chase accomplishments, thinking the next milestone will finally bring peace. Others drown themselves in pleasure, substances, or entertainment, hoping to escape the restlessness inside. But none of it works for long. The emptiness always returns, sometimes louder than before. St. Augustine once wrote, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you." That restlessness you feel is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that you were created for more. It's God's reminder that you were not made to carry life alone. You were made to live with Him at the center. Testimonies from around the world confirm this. People who had tried everything to find peace, money, power, pleasure, found it only when they surrendered to God. Some of the most dramatic transformations come from those who had hit rock bottom, only to discover that the peace they had searched for their whole lives was waiting in Jesus all along. And the same is true for you. The emptiness you feel is not permanent. It's an invitation to let God fill what nothing else can. But the world will tell you otherwise. The world is full of false promises about what will make you happy. Culture screams that if you just have more, do more, experience more, you'll finally be satisfied. It tells you that happiness comes from freedom without boundaries, pleasure without limits, and success without sacrifice. And many chase those promises, only to find themselves more broken than when they started. Think about the story of the prodigal son in Luke 15. He thought life away from his father's house would bring him freedom. He thought wealth and pleasure would make him happy, so he took his inheritance and ran. For a while it seemed to work. He partied, he spent freely, he lived without rules. But soon the famine came, the money ran out, the friends disappeared, and he found himself alone, starving, feeding pigs. That's the picture of what happens when we chase the false promises of the world. It may feel good for a season, but eventually the famine always comes. The prodigal son's story is our story. Every time we believe the world's lies, that freedom comes from rejecting God, that joy comes from indulgence, that success comes from selfish ambition, we are stepping onto the same path. And just like him, we eventually find that the world's promises are empty. They look bright at first, but leave us hungry in the end. The enemy knows this. That's why he paints sin as attractive. That's why the world's promises always look good on the surface. Because if they looked destructive, no one would chase them. But behind the shiny exterior lies brokenness. Behind the temporary thrill lies regret. Behind the false promises lies famine. The world says, live for yourself. God says, die to yourself and truly live. The world says, follow your heart. God says, the heart is deceitful above all things. The world says, you don't need God, you just need more. But more never satisfies. Only God does. The false promises of the world will always fail because they were never designed to hold the weight of your soul. They can entertain you, distract you, even excite you, but they cannot sustain you. The prodigal son learned that the hard way, and many of us do too. But the beauty of his story is that even in the famine, there was hope. Because the moment he remembered his father's house and turned back, everything changed. And the same is true for us. Even if we've chased every false promise, even if we've run far, the Father is still waiting with open arms to restore us the moment we return. There is a difference between having God as part of your life and having Him as the center of your life. Many people believe in God, pray when they're in trouble, and even go to church on Sundays, but still live as though they are the ones in control. God is present, but He's not central. He's on the list, but He's not the foundation. That difference may seem small at first, but in reality, it determines everything. Think of the solar system. The sun doesn't just exist as one planet among many. It is the center, the source of light, heat, and gravity. Everything else orbits around it. If you were to move the sun out of its place, the entire system would collapse. That's exactly how life works with God. He was never meant to be a side piece or an accessory. He was meant to be the center that holds everything else together. When He is not in that place, our lives begin to spin out of orbit. Some people live with God as a Sunday obligation, while the rest of their week revolves around career, money, or self. Others acknowledge God in moments of crisis, but set Him aside when things seem to be going well. But God doesn't ask to be part-time. He doesn't ask to be squeezed into the leftover spaces of your life. He asks for the throne. He asks to be the king. And if He's not the center, everything else eventually falls apart. Partial surrender is one of the greatest deceptions. It gives the appearance of faith, but lacks the power of true obedience. It's like building half the house on rock and the other half on sand. For a while, it may look stable, but when the storm comes, the side built on sand will give way, and soon the entire house will collapse. That's why Jesus said, "You cannot serve two masters." You cannot center your life on God and on yourself at the same time. One will always take the throne. Ask yourself honestly, is God truly at the center of my life, or is He just part of it? Do my decisions, my goals, my relationships orbit around Him, or do I invite Him in only when it's convenient? Because until He is at the center, you will always feel the cracks beneath your feet. The Bible is full of examples of what happens when people try to live without God at the center. Samson is one of the most tragic. Gifted with supernatural strength, chosen from birth, called to deliver Israel, yet he lived with divided loyalty. He wanted God's calling, but also wanted his own desires. He played with temptation, compromised his boundaries, and eventually revealed the secret of his strength. The man who once tore lions apart with his bare hands ended up blind, shackled, and mocked by his enemies. His story shows us that great gifts and potential mean nothing without God at the center. King Saul is another sobering example. Anointed as Israel's first king, he started with humility, but pride and disobedience took root. He began to fear people more than he feared God. He tried to control outcomes instead of trusting the Lord's command. Eventually, God's Spirit departed from him, and his kingdom crumbled. A man who could have led with honor died in despair on the battlefield, a picture of what happens when power is pursued without obedience. Even entire nations in Scripture show us this pattern. Israel flourished when God was at the center, but when they turned to idols, chasing after foreign gods, their strength withered and they were taken into exile. The rise and fall of kingdoms often came down to one simple truth: whether or not God was their foundation. These stories are not just ancient history, they are warnings for us today. They remind us that charisma, strength, wealth, and talent are never enough. You can be the strongest person in the room, the most gifted, the most influential, but without God at the center, it will eventually unravel. The collapse may not happen immediately. Samson still had his strength for a while. Saul still wore the crown for a time. Israel still looked prosperous, even as their hearts turned away. But collapse always comes when God is no longer the foundation. And maybe you've seen this play out in your own life or in the lives of people around you. Someone who seemed unstoppable suddenly crumbles because hidden sin was left unchecked. Someone who looked powerful loses everything because pride consumed them. Someone who seemed to have it all ends up empty, broken, and lost. These are not coincidences. They are reminders that life without God at the center cannot stand. While the Bible gives us sobering warnings of collapse when God is not at the center, it also gives us powerful examples of what stability and endurance look like when He is. One of the clearest is Joseph. Betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and thrown into prison, Joseph's life could have completely fallen apart. By all human measures, he had every reason to give up, to grow bitter, to lose hope. But the Bible says over and over, the Lord was with Joseph. And because God was at the center, every setback became a setup for a greater purpose. What looked like defeat was actually preparation. In time, Joseph was elevated to second in command in Egypt, and the very brothers who sold him had to come and bow before him. His life shows us that when God is the center, even betrayal, injustice, and hardship cannot destroy us. They only shape us for greater things. Then there's Daniel. Taken from his homeland, exiled to Babylon, surrounded by a culture that worshipped idols, he had every opportunity to compromise. Yet Daniel resolved in his heart that he would not defile himself. He chose God at the center, even when it meant facing a lion's den. And what happened? God shut the mouths of the lions and preserved his life. His enemies were destroyed, and his influence grew even stronger. Daniel's story reminds us that stability doesn't mean the absence of danger. It means the presence of God in the middle of danger. Look also at the early church. They faced persecution, imprisonment, even death. By all human logic, they should have scattered in fear, yet they grew stronger. Why? Because Christ was their center. They weren't building on comfort, popularity, or safety. They were building on the unshakable foundation of Jesus Christ. And because of that, no amount of persecution could silence them. The more they were pressed, the more the gospel spread. These examples shine a light for us today. When God is the center, storms don't destroy you, they refine you. Trials don't break you, they deepen your roots. Opposition doesn't silence you, it amplifies your testimony. That's the difference God makes. It's not that life becomes easy, but that life becomes unshakable. And the beautiful truth is this: even if your life has already fallen apart, even if you've drifted from God or built on the wrong foundation, it is never too late to rebuild with Him at the center. Rebuilding begins with surrender. It means admitting, Lord, I cannot do this on my own. I've tried and I've failed. I need you to be the foundation. That's the first and hardest step, but it's also the most freeing, because the moment you surrender, you stop carrying the burden alone. Then, rebuilding means shifting your priorities. Putting God at the center requires practical choices. It means prayer is not your last resort, but your first response. It means the Bible is not just a book on your shelf, but the guide for your daily decisions. It means surrounding yourself with a community of believers who encourage and strengthen your faith instead of pulling you away. Rebuilding also means patience. When a building collapses, you can't reconstruct it overnight. The same is true for your life. God is a master builder, and He works layer by layer, restoring what was broken, healing what was wounded, and planting new foundations where the old ones gave way. You may not see the full picture right away, but trust that He is working. The enemy will try to convince you that it's too late, that you're too far gone, that the collapse was final. But nothing is final with God. He specializes in redemption stories. He turns ashes into beauty, brokenness into strength, and graves into gardens. If he can restore Joseph from prison to palace, Daniel from lion's den to prominence, the early church from persecution to global impact, he can restore your life too. So what does it look like practically to rebuild with God at the center? It looks like waking up in the morning and saying, God, this day is yours. Lead me. It looks like measuring your decisions not by convenience or culture, but by His Word. It looks like inviting Him into every part of your life, your work, your family, your relationships, your dreams, and letting Him direct the path. Rebuilding is not just about fixing what's broken. It's about building something stronger than what was there before. When God is the cornerstone, the structure can withstand storms that once would have destroyed it. And as you rebuild, your life becomes a testimony. People who knew your past will look at your present and say, only God could have done this.